Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be creating an Alebrije, so without further ado, let's get right on into the video. Alebrijes are essentially brightly colored Mexican folk sculptures of fantasy/mythical creatures. I love the aesthetic and I don't own any, so I decided to turn one into a doll. These were just the references I used. This was the first concept that I created. It had all the singular things that I wanted, but it didn't mash together in the way that I had wanted. So I decided to come up with this design, and it was perfect. So I decided that this was going to be the one that we're using. Now to go through my stock box of dolls to try and find the base that I was thinking of using. I tried to keep this base in mind while drawing the concept, and that base was Gil Weber from Monster High. I then removed his face with 100% acetone nail polish remover, and I'm sorry but my gut is in the way for most of all of these films. I used my fingernail to get into all the crevices in his eyes and his lips. I then dunked his head in some boiling water. I just popped in the microwave for a couple of minutes. And then, without trying to burn myself, I pop it right on off. I created this concept for what I wanted his legs to look like, keeping in mind Dollightful's videos. I wanted to keep them bulky and I wanted them to be articulated. In order to do this, we have to cut his legs into several parts. So I use a marker, preferably a Sharpie marker, and I mark where we're going to be using my handy dandy Dremel to cut him into bits and pieces. We won't be needing his feet, so we'll use them for a special project later. And after injuring myself, ouch, we finally have the cases off of the knee joints. I then drilled holes in the upper thighs, which will be used to attach them with wire, which was honestly a lot harder to do than it looks. Don't recommend. I then encased the wire in some hot glue just to keep it nice and secure. This also created a bit of an armature for the epoxy that we're going to add later. Here's what the legs were looking like so far. Then, using that drawing that I showed you earlier, I created two little wire hooks that pop into the back of the thigh. I used some hot glue to go ahead and secure that in there. Here they are. I then created two little tongue shapes. Here you can see the two different sizes, but that won't matter in the end. And those will become his lower legs. I then covered the wire loops that we had just created in epoxy so that way we can build up his joints. This was pretty hard to do. I then covered the rest of his head with the leftover epoxy, and pass one is done. And since I didn't twist his legs earlier when I was adding the hot glue, one of his legs broke when I was trying to twist it. So I secured it with a little bit of super glue and some hot glue, and I hoped that that would keep it in place, but it worked for then. I then used some hot glue to cover the wire armature little tongy thingies that we had created previously. I got hot glue on my table, would not recommend. I then started adding some tin foil to them. This was just to create a little base for the epoxy to go on later, because first of all, epoxy is like $40 for the big tubs that I use, and it's super heavy and we don't really want that, but he ended up being super heavy in the end. So, and I go ahead and do the exact same thing for the other leg. I did both the legs at different times, so you'll see that there's two different clips for each leg. And you may or may not see a sneak peek of the leg while I'm making this one, because I needed to use it for a mock-up. Oh, sneaky. Remind me never to say that again. Here's one leg done, and I used hot glue to fill in the big indents in the tinfoil. I honestly don't know why I did this. So, now that we have the legs, we can use my favorite 2-part epoxy sculpt to start laying it on top of the tin foil. I didn't worry about this necessarily being smooth because it ended up being pointless in the end. Ignore what I just said, here's the mock-up of the leg. I then did the exact same thing to the other leg, same old, just covered in epoxy. I then used polymer clay and a ball tool to create little clawed toes, and after baking them, I put them on a toothpick, and then I made little parts for them to sit in the foot. And I then encased the little nibs of the toothpick on each side, using epoxy, of course. So here's what they were looking like, and now both legs are done. I didn't have any nuts and bolts, mainly because it's not something that I normally have around my house. So I had to use a barbecuing skewer, which wasn't ideal, but honestly, it was cheaper and it worked better. And his leg broke again, so I just hot glued that and just kept it like that. I then covered all the hot glue that we made previously. I don't know why, but I was dreading this process. All in epoxy. And with that, all of the epoxy mods are done. This took me 4 days. It was a tedious process. And here are his legs put together, both of them for the first time. And they are so cool. I am so proud of myself. Look at those toes. They're poseable. I then created some horns out of polymer clay. And then after I baked them, I just popped them on with some hot glue. Same old. I then shoved some toothpicks on the sides of either side of his head. And I created a thin film of hot glue to create some super awesome, sick little finned ears. I was partially inspired by Dawn Motion for this and her video with the frog dude. I loved it. Also because Gil had fins on his hands and I wanted to carry that away. I then used hot glue to encompass the skewers that we had put inside of his legs. And with that, all of the mods are done. I then took this yellow acrylic airbrush paint, I got it secondhand, and I went ahead and I did 4 to 5 coats, if I can remember correctly, all over his body. And of course his face. And I had completely forgot to sand the body, so I had to do that halfway within painting, which sucked. And some of you may be wondering, well, why yellow? And to that I say, I've been watching a lot of Andatronic, which I will put their YouTube channel down below, and they just created a super cool glitch crap costume, and I was super inspired by all the golden going on, and his toes broke while I was painting him, so that sucked. And I decided to give him some black hands and feet. I don't know why, it looked cool. I then used hot glue to create fingernails, which was so hard. I can't even say how hard that was. Despite them taking really long, I was really proud of them in the end. I then gave the toes a coat of silver paint, and I used my X-Acto knife to carve some little scars all over his body and face. I was trying to think of, maybe how somebody may have taken their sword and sliced and diced him up. I also got rid of his arm fins. And at this point, he was kind of looking a lot like a bit of a familiar face. Haha, Leo. So I decided, in order to set them apart, even though they're literally 2 different creatures, that I was going to blush him with some yellow ochre paint. And I also went in with some gold, as we will see in a minute. Here's the gold paint that I said you would see me using. Fun fact, I actually started recording this in the middle of November. And I don't know what time it is that I'm uploading it, but, I then used all these paints that you see on the screen to create his super cool Alebrije tattoos. I figured that the designs on Alebrije's would translate really well into a full body of tats. And since they were really detailed, I decided to do most of them off camera. So I only got like half of one tattoo on camera, so I hope that's enough. When I was painting these, I don't know why, but it remembered me, or like reminded me of those like dream things from Inside Out, you know, like the memories. I don't know, maybe it's just me. So here are all of his tattoos. I created some lines on his upper thighs, some dots there. I even painted his fins. I then did some confetti in the back, you know, some stuff on either sides of his arms. And now it's time for the face-up. Normally face-ups, when I do them, they would be pretty short because when I'm watching YouTube videos of doll customizers, I normally don't like watching the face-up. But I do know that a lot of you do like watching the face-up, so I decided to keep this one a little bit longer. But just fair warning, I'm ranting, so oops. So after this video, I recently finished my Zodiac series, which if you don't know what that is, go to my Instagram, you should see it. They're really cool. And I've been meaning to start another series, and I've started like 2, but I've never wanted to finish them. So if you have any ideas for a doll series you would like to see, pop a comment down below. I would really be interested in it. I decided to give him those creepy little like red pupils, or like different colored pupils that you see when you like take a really crappy photo. I don't know why, but that scared me when I was a kid, and that is probably why you don't see very many photos of me as a child. I then painted in his scars, and I gave him some brown eyebrows, because at this point I was settled on giving him brown hair until I figured out I didn't have any brown yarn. So that was something, but we ended up making it work in the end. I carried on those dots that you see on his lower chest area onto his face, and they're kind of just like assorted freckles. Also, look at my super cool Pokemon table, and with that, his face up is done. I then painted his horns that I made with polymer clay black, and I blushed them with some red, and I then painted his fin ears dark blue, which I wish I would have put some more detail in. Time for his hair. He has hair on his head, forearms, and lower legs. To do this, I used all of these yarns. I then wrap it around my phone, RIP phone 2020, and this is all of the yarn that we have. In order to make wefts, I took one of every color, folded it in half, and then essentially did a slip knot onto the pencil. And I then used a pet brush to brush it out. And I am aware that most people straighten it, but I don't do that. I don't know why, it just looks a lot better without it, in my opinion. And after all this floof, we have all of these wefts. I then used my handy dandy hot glue gun to go ahead and glue them onto his body. I'm not gonna lie, this took me a really long time to do. Because, I mean, it was just, I really wanted to make sure that everything looked good, because I was set on giving this to somebody, but then I didn't end up doing it, because I may or may have not fell in love with him. It was love at first sight. I also did his forearms off camera, and then I gave them, you know, a little itty bitty trim, make them look all prim and proper, and I then did his hair, which was cool without the trim, but it looked better with it. I then started his loincloth, which I used this red scrunchy fabric. It has a name for it, I'm not sure. And I painted it rainbow off camera. This is getting very Pride themed. And I then hot glued it on with a little bit of some gold ribbon, which you'll see me using later toward the end. And I then took a piece of yarn, which is not the ideal material for what I'm doing, but it was all that I had at the time. And I double knotted it, and I wrapped it around his neck, and I tied it in the back. And I then took another little sliver of that golden ribbon, and I hot glued it onto the knot, which I burnt myself many times, not gonna lie. And with that, he's done. Well, I really hope you love him. Goodbye.